This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning, and we take a look at the political pieces we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 9th of April 2020, and I am DM.
I am JM.
And I am GK, and in case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, we stand with Kenya. In the Star, we stand with Kenya. And in the Standard, we stand with Kenya. So it seems that the three media houses came together, called each other up and said, we're going to do something for country. And it's to say that we stand with Kenya. And I think it's because there's an unmistakable feeling that we are all collectively going through one of these moments that you would never have even have thought about. And the whole, most of the articles sort of chronicle what the impact of this pandemic has been, coronavirus, and the problem of, disinformation, but also the problem of, people not paying attention to the directives that government is giving, but also how poor and developing countries with fragile economies are sort of being heavily impacted by coronavirus. So yeah, it was touching. I'm not sure why they had to do all three of them at the same time.
Do you think they did it in solidarity with the country or in solidarity with each other, because they're also facing, besides the coronavirus, declining sales?
Times are tough. Times are truly tough.
Newspapers are now considered virus vectors.
Exactly. So what do we say about these headlines? Do we buy it? Especially because for the last year they've sort of fed us all sorts of nonsense,
negativity,
and negativity. Is this genuine?
I think that it's disingenuous.
So shall we toss all the headlines?
Violently.
By headlines. So no winning headlines for today, although we note that there was some patriotic feeling towards this. The deputy president of the Hustlers, gave a speech at around 11 a.m. today. He sort of addressed the nation. So I want us to go through this sort of in three parts. Let's look at first, what was the thinking or the rationale behind him giving this statement? Well, firstly, we can deduce that he has been absent since the pandemic began. And if you follow the 48 laws of power, it says that scarcity creates value, or also economics, right? So he is creating sort of this, okay, he's going to come out, what is he going to say? And today was his moment.
All eyes on him.
All eyes on him.
That worked.
Exactly. It worked to that extent. The optics were there, as we will discuss. But also, what is not seen is not counted. And maybe he's thinking his absence from the scene may be doing him more political harm than it should. And so basically he came out, and this is him addressing the hustlers. Because the truth is, he has a constituent of people who support him. And if he didn't say anything, you're damned if you do, and damned if you don't.
Exactly.
So what can we say about the statement itself?
But even before that, do you think that he did it on his own volition, or was it a collective decision?
He must have done it on his own volition.
You think he defied his boss?
He defied his boss. We know from January he's been on a warpath. Or rather, that other side of government has been on a warpath with him. And so, that relationship with him and the president, for all intents and purposes, has been a really rocky one.
So you're saying DP was non-essential staff in this time, and he has been at home waiting, and he defied his boss and said, you know what, I'm going to come out and say something. Because I think the reality is that, a deputy should derive his power and instruction from the president. So if he came out and this was something Uhuru doesn't know about, Uhuru is a very mad man tonight.
He kicked the State House cat.
He must have.
As the speech was being read. But about this, about the statement itself, he obviously said everything that we already know. It was just, his speech was an amalgamation of all the directives and of everything that we've been hearing from Mutahi Kagwe in the past few weeks, all the platitudes. So I don't think it was about what he said. I mean, he could have stood there and sung a song and it wouldn't have made a difference. It was for us to see him, not to hear him. And speaking about the optics, which you mentioned, GK, I think it was very deliberately staged. If you noticed, he was standing in front of a very stately lectern. There were
very well choreographed.
Very well choreographed. There was 5 flags behind him, and he was reading a speech, which is very unusual. It looked like a presidential dry run.
Yeah.
But then also, I think from his body language, he seemed very passive aggressive.
Yes.
And it's probably because of what you've mentioned, JM, also that this wasn't in tandem. It wasn't in tandem with the office of the president itself. Because if it was, we would also have seen the presidential press side of things also telling us that there's the DP is going to address the nation at this time and on this day. The other thing is, much as I'm saying that he said everything we already know, there's one thing that sounded like a contradiction. When he said that there'll be 1,000 doctors or healthcare workers that will be onboarded. And this is the one thing that he said that was predictive, first of all, which made him look like he's in the know, because we are all saying that he's sidelined and probably isn't being included in the generation of directives. But also, remember, Dr. Mwagangi had told us that they're onboarding 500, not 1,000.
Not 1,000,
there was that one contradiction.
Interesting, interesting. And then we have post-statement. You know, now we're here. He has made the statement. Did he achieve what he intended to achieve? If it was just to be seen and not heard necessarily, right? So what now?
I think he achieved his objective. I have 4 observations on this. The first is that if you noticed, he addressed himself, particularly when he spoke in Swahili and in some of the questions, to the poor in urban areas. And to read William Ruto, you also have to read his lieutenants. Moses Kuria, for example, today announced that he's donated 25 million to support vulnerable families in slum areas within Kiambu and Nairobi. And that will pay rent. That will also be money for essential food items. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not a coincidence. This is all also very well choreographed. And in fact, I want to be a bit cheeky here and talk about the Robin Hood moment. Now, if at all what we have been told for the last 1.5 years is true
on headlines,
that this Tanga brigade, as well as Deputy President himself, is somebody who cannot be trusted with resources.
They're extractors.
If they've been extracting from government, from the rich, quote unquote, this is now their time to redistribute this to the poor, the urban poor. And that is how they will gain a lot of political mileage.
It's true. And Machiavelli, the prince, always says, you know, you must get the goodwill of your people at some point. And sometimes love and these gestures are useful to you as a leader.
Absolutely. Number three. This is my 3rd observation. How will the president react to this? As we've said before, the president has been on, you know, a sort of warpath with the deputy president. And so maybe one of the things we should expect to see is a very categorical statement coming from one side of the government to, you know, just basically distance themselves from this statement. And the 4th, a bit unrelated, is where's Baba? Where's Raila in all of this? Baba has also been very quiet. And as you said, as you said earlier, GK, in the arena of politics, absence, yes, is valuable, but not too much of it, because what is not seen isn't counted.
Exactly.
And so Raila, and you know Raila, right now he must be like a fish out of water.
You crushed his BBI dream.
Precisely. This guy only thrives in a political environment. He has no locus now. He doesn't hold any position in government. And so he must be thinking to himself, he cannot be outdone by the deputy president.
So we should expect another address soon from Baba Camp?
Precisely. His political agenda has been delayed probably for the rest of the year. And so he must be back to the drawing board, asking himself, how do I make myself relevant again? And how do I keep my agenda going? So we should expect to see that in the coming weeks.
Especially now that we can bet that the headlines tomorrow will be back to RUTO.
Interesting.
Precisely.
So I think there you have a political spin on COVID-19. So onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? So let's begin with Dula of the Daily Nation. And he has drawn a caricature of a very little Mike Sonko and a very big Major General Mohammed Badi, who had taken over as the Nairobi Metropolitan guy. And so basically he's holding a big broom, and Sonko is holding the other, it has another small broom attached to it, and he's saying, let go. And Badi is saying, no. So yes, a funny cartoon there.
Yeah, funny.
Because I think Sonko is now realizing he may have signed off his life. He's now without mandate and wondering why. Yet he put his signature.
He's realizing that now.
Yeah. A little too late, but a very funny cartoon.
It is.
Can we move? Do you like it? Can we park it?
Let's park it.
Let's park it.
Particularly like it.
In the Standard, we have 4 images.
Yeah.
We have Bill Withers, rest in peace. So Bill Withers sang famous songs like Ain't No Sunshine and Lean On Me. And then you have what looks like a mountain goat, or Billy the Goat. I think it's an American term there.
Yeah.
And then you have the scapegoat, which is Chinese President Xi Jinping. And then you have the Trump himself, the Donald, saying goat, which is supposed to be the greatest of all time, but it says the gross of all time.
Should have been the grossest, huh?
Yes, the grossest of all time. And I think Gado has borrowed this image from Bruce McKinnon. And it had another image there with another set of goats. A billy goat, a mountain goat, and a scapegoat. Yeah.
Toss that.
It was even a mouthful reading, trying to describe it. And then in the Star, we have a building of parliament. And we have a very grimacing, angry COVID virus on top of it. And the caption there is, perhaps now our leaders will consider sanitizing our healthcare system. And I think this is off the backs of saying very many MPs may have tested positive for COVID-19.
All of whom denied.
Which they all denied, which I think is, we didn't expect anything less.
By the way, I think this thought of leveling the healthcare system because of COVID is actually a fallacy. What will happen is that rich people only make the good hospitals better so that they don't have to travel out, but the rest of the population will not benefit.
Continue to struggle.
Unfortunately.
Who can we give our winning cartoon? Do we give it to Sonko and the broom?
Absolutely.
And his straw?
I concur.
For learning for Lasana. But there you have it. Dula gives us our winning cartoon of the Daily Nation. What is our final thought?
Our final thought is inspired by a book called Numbers Rule Your World. It was written in 2010 by Kaiser Fung. Numbers Rule Your World, the hidden influence of probability and statistics on everything you do. This book is a guide to statistical reasoning and how you can use concrete statistical information productively to understand as well as to improve and inform your world. So the book highlights 5 key principles of statistics and how they can be applied to improve decision making in different contexts. And I'll mention 2. The first is that statisticians or statistics works by showing causation and correlation. And it's a very important distinction, because sometimes even us laymen statisticians will confuse the two. Causation is when variable A causes variable B. But correlation is when A and B exist at the same time, but do not necessarily result in each other. Now, the example that he gives in this book is actually quite apt, because he refers to the E. coli epidemic of, was it 2010, in the United States. And statisticians had to work, or epidemiologists had to work towards finding where it came from. So they narrowed it down saying it's a bacteria, it affects the stomach, so it must have been ingested. And then narrowed it down up to 5 people in, I think, the state of Oregon. Wow. And then narrowed down what they had eaten, and by deduction found that it was packaged spinach. Interesting. So then they determined without a doubt that it was the spinach that caused the E. coli. So they found the causation and helped to inform policy and directives about withholding them from the shelves and so on and so forth. I think I'll refer to another book that we've done here called Freakonomics to demonstrate correlation. If you remember the example of crime and ice cream spiking up at the same time, and the Levitz was telling us it's not that they cause each other, it's just that they exist at the same time, and there are different explanations or causations for those. And then secondly, statistics takes group differences in order to account for or to ensure equality.
Yeah.
This involves studying specific demographics. A good application of this is in examinations, for instance. So to design a fair test, statisticians make sure that questions that give preference to one demographic group over another are omitted. And a good example for this is international IQ tests, which have always, or for a long time, was skewed towards the Western demographic. So if you're an African or an Asian with a very high IQ, you'd sit an IQ test, but fail it. And it's not because your IQ is low, but because the questions have nuances that are outside of your cultural scope.
So you may not know who Postman Pat is.
Those American references.
Absolutely. My key takeaway from this was that for statisticians, variations from the average are more relevant than the average itself. And so they usually look at the outliers. And here's what the author asks. Have you ever been in traffic, waiting for the lights to go off and thinking, if they had just had one more lane on this road, there would be, there would be far less traffic? It may seem that way, but the author tells us that according to statistics, this is not necessarily the case. Highway congestion, he tells us, is the result of suddenly high volumes of cars being on the road at the same time, which exceed the road's average capacity. And he gives an example of how the Minnesota Department of Transportation has dealt with this problem by using a technique called ramp metering, or what we would call in British English slip road metering. And it works by installing traffic lights at slip roads, at the end of the slip road, to regulate the pace at which cars enter the highway, thereby stabilizing the number of cars on the road. Now that we're talking about slip roads and traffic lights and congestion, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my frustration, and I'm sure the frustration of many Kenyans, about the average Kenyan driver and how they do not understand sometimes how some of these lanes work. So, for example, the average Kenyan driver will cut you off mercilessly, as matatus do, but they don't understand how to use merge lanes. I'll give two examples. One is the exit from James Gishuru to Ayakwe. There's actually a slip road, what you call an acceleration lane that you're supposed to use. And the idea, and we have a video up here to show you, the idea is that you're supposed to go to the end of the lane, you're supposed to accelerate and then join. But most Kenyans, particularly Uber drivers, these taxify drivers, they just want to plunge into the road suddenly. They want to just cut right into it. Terrible. And so they usually cause a whole snarl up. It's really inefficient. And the second,
we will change our ways.
Precisely. You must. Another case in point, Red Hill Road and Limuru Road junction. When you're leaving Red Hill Road to join Limuru Road, going towards UN Avenue, there's also a merger lane that you're supposed to get on. Most times people coming from Red Hill will want once again to join, especially when there's traffic coming from like Village Market, they'll want to join it at the beginning rather than at the end. But what they're supposed to do is you're supposed to merge at the end. That's what's called the zipper merge, to maximize road space and reduce road congestion.
Hey, you heard it here.
So dear viewers, please spread the gospel, spread this news of proper driving.
I felt like I was in driving school.
Amen.
People need refresher courses.
So I looked at the part of the book that looked at looking at the bigger picture, how statisticians don't just look at the facts in front of them, but they try to put them into context, and also how to question the patterns that are in front of you. So statistics tells us that the odds of winning the lottery are 1 in 10 million, roughly comparable to the odds of dying in a plane crash. And at these long odds, none of us in our lifetime are likely to win the lottery or die in a plane crash. That's the reality. However, 50% of Americans are still playing state lotteries in the hope that they will win. And at least 30% of people still fear flying, even though, the odds are so stacked up against them. But the reason this happens is because of our belief in miracles, and that's what drives some of these attitudes. So you find that even if rare events do not happen often, when they do happen, we think that they will happen to us. right? And so statisticians tend to take the contrarian view. And they write off the chance of hitting a jackpot, and they're not worried about jet crashes. And so Kaiser Fang, the author of the book, gets us to question these obvious patterns. So he gives an example. In 1999, an Egypt Air jet crashed. And nobody survived, and it crashed near the Atlantic Ocean. However, before this happened, 3 other jet crashes had happened. Same scenario, same location in the past 4 years. So that's 4 crashes in 4 years, same area. So much so that this area in the Atlantic Ocean, near Nantucket, was named the Bermuda Triangle of the Northeast. And they were really like, you know, there were stories in the news about it, like disproportionately covered these crashes, And so because of these 4 crashes, people were asking, could this still really be random? And the pattern seemed too tidy for it to still be the work of, you know, chance, right? And so based on the pattern, people rejected some of these, so they started not flying that route. Like if that's the route it would go, they didn't want that. They stopped flying airlines from the Middle East, and specifically Egypt Air, so much so that Egypt Air had to retire that flight number. And so he says that there's an author called Glasner who wrote a book called The Culture of Fear. And he says that the hysteria after a plane crash is often far worse than the crash itself. Because people who abandon their flight plans or start doing different behaviors face a greater risk. So for instance, you are more likely to die from a road accident than actually a flight, a drunken driver or something like that, And so statisticians look at the problem differently. Instead of seeing 4 crashes in 4 years, they saw 4 black dots put in a screen of 1 million white dots. Now the 1 million white dots signified safe travel, safe flights over that same area. But if you look at the 4 crashes in the 4 years, they stick out like stars in the night. It's like, what? This is so glaring. But if you put it into context and you look back, the problem isn't as drastic as you think. Now, this method is creating that new picture, that new visual. And so questioning that pattern is really important. And so it's the same way, for instance, this coronavirus pandemic on its own looks very stark. But when you put it into context, just like we have been in the last few weeks, you see that the Spanish flu of 1918 killed about 40 to 50 million people. Smallpox in the 1520s killed about 56 million people. The bubonic plague or the Black Death killed about 200 million people. And then you have smaller ones like TB, HIV and AIDS, which are killing way more people at a faster rate than the coronavirus will when this is over. So putting it into context will help us sort of rationalize our fears. So on a day where we had no winning headlines, but we applaud them for trying to get us to be patriotic, we did have a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation, from Dula. We had a challenge yesterday, quarantine challenge. The answer is empty. So you can watch the last one and then see what empty means to you. Today's challenge, you see a boat filled with people, yet there isn't a single person on board. How is that possible? Please don't Google. Let's not cheat. And let me leave you with this. Numbers already rule your world, and you must not be in the dark about this fact. And you'll be amazed how you can use numbers to make your life even better. So don't fear them. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Prime Free to Air, and Star Times. Have a lovely evening.